Chapter 2. "Do you know who I am, you filth?" asked Vec, a sanguine cloak fully covering his tall, menacing stature. "Do you know what they call me in these lands?" "What do you?" You are known throughout. You are the king of the desert," replied a man, shaking so violently that the post he was tied to propagated neat, concentric circles outwards into the sand. I'll do anything you ask. Tell you whatever you want to know. Just please don't kill me. I can help you. I know." "Coward," spat the creature. Vec began to step sideways, leaving scratch prints in the sand behind him. The miner, having only just regained consciousness, took in and assessed the situation. Barely visible through the pre-morning darkness, two posts stood silhouetted against the golden desert sand that extended for unknown distances. He looked out at the mountainous dunes in front of him, hiding the slowly rising sun, whose rays bent and expanded outwards over the peaks. The air was cold, for Caldunian nights were always chilly, but soon it would be scorching. This was a planet of extremes, a fact which he appreciated. The miner looked at the first prisoner, now nourishing the thirsty, bleak desert, and wondered if the same fate awaited him. Vec slowly crept to the next bound man, Dan. According to the horror's stories, Dan enjoyed a recent rise to fame, acquiring a small following after his performance in this year's Ronsk Games. The burly man, sporting a long, thick beard, recognized the devil demon in front of him. "Vec, you son of a bitch, I won't give you nothing. You can use your magic on me, like you do to us lowlives, but I won't talk. I won't give you any satisfaction." In a flash, Vec raised his arm, hooding Dan's head with the cloak's deep-cut arms. A second passed, and Dan's body began to tremble. Goose flesh ripped across the skin, and a muffled hum could be heard. Vec's cloak pulsed brighter, starting from the sleeves, then coursing vein-like throughout the cloak. After about 30 seconds, the trembling stopped. Footprints in the sand. No, scratches in the desert. Vec's loyal companions and bodyguards, part of the Blood Army, scurried about the nearby encampment. They looked to be about 50 strong. There was probably another encampment heading towards the southern capital. They were a quick and effective raiding force, capable of crippling nearby towns and looting the goods stored within. Their maroon cloaks inspired fear in all who found themselves in the unfortunate situation of being close enough to see them. They were not the same as Vec's cloak, for his was of a different breed. The miner knew a bit about the blood cloaks and the Ron. The Howlers had taught him well and prepared him for what he might see before he left the safety of their stronghold. Vec stretched his neck in an odd direction, then turned to the miner. It seems as though he was plotting against my men. That, however, is unimportant. I am most curious about you. Who would be stupid enough to steal one of my scrolls? Where did you put it?" he roared. 6 blood cloaks, observing the proceedings about 20 paces away, trembled slightly at Vec's anger. Vec gestured towards the other prisoners. "These men died because of you, your actions. How does that make you feel?" "Wood. Why did it have to be wood? Got greedy and stayed a bit too long in Gunneth, and now I'm stuck here, strung up high on a wooden post." He stretched out with all his effort, yet his feet were not even close to touching the sand. It probably wouldn't make much of a difference anyway. Damn. "Well, prisoner number 1 over there has painted quite an interesting artwork. Really adds to the flow of the desert, don't you agree?" replied the miner. At this, Vec reeled back, then laughed loudly. "You're just as much of a sick bastard as I am, aren't you? And here I was, hearing rumors you had something to do with the clergy," he said. Then a thought later, his disposition changed and became contrastingly serious. "Do you know where we are? On what ground we stand? This is the great battleground, where ancient and wondrous civilizations warred against each other, their mammoth beasts pounding and driving into the sand. The clashes of tusks could be heard as far off as Dunok, a warning of their impending doom. Your bones will have plenty of company here. You make it sound like you were there, the miner remarked. Vex smiled. The miner, like a sentinel, stared out across the dunes at the rising sun. Rays of light were beginning to streak across the sand in distorted patterns due to the large mound of sand in front of him, which kept the light and heat off them. As the world became brighter, the miner became aware of the white reflections littered across the nearby dunes, which he now realized were bones. Truly, there must have been a great war here. Back in Gunnith, although only having been there a few days, he saw many large tusks hanging over the local shop doors. They seemed to be a symbol of pride to the owner, who was even able to carve their family name into the magnificent ivory. He had seen tusks with the thickness of a tree trunk, which only made him wonder what sort of beast had bore them. At the time, however, he hadn't paid too much attention to the town or its inhabitants. He had focused on the task at hand. "All right, Fekiva, let's get down to business," called the miner. The sun was coming up, and the unpleasant stench of blood and death was wafting his way. "If I'm going to die, let's get this over with fast. I hate the fucking sun." At the sound of hearing his full name, Vec winced a bit. No one in town knew him by that name. No idiot miner knew that. Neither would shit-brained thieves who had the nerve to steal from him. Perhaps in Dreg, the northern capital, there could be a few with that knowledge, but down here? "Where did you hear that name?" The miner smiled. "Who the fuck are you?" Vec moved in closer. As he approached him, there was a glint of gold from the miner's neck. "I was told that necklace of yours doesn't seem to come off. They couldn't find a key on you, just like they couldn't find my scroll. Maybe they just didn't try hard enough." Vec reached for the chain. As his talons crept close to the cool metal, a spark leapt out, striking the Ron, who recoiled quickly, cursed under his breath. "Who the hell are you? Why did you steal my Heiligen scroll? Surely it is of no use to you," he spat. The miner gave the Ron a twisted smile. "So you're not going to talk. I'll get the information my way." Vec then hooded the miner's head, as he had done to Dan, and the miner felt talons grip his skull. A second passed, but nothing happened. Vec brought his arm back to his side with a puzzled look. "A protected mind. Intriguing. That's not something you see every day." "I'll have to settle for that necklace, then," said the Ron, pulling out his knife. "You're no desert king, Vec. You're just a malformed, fiendish Aviali. You can't even fly," taunted the miner. Vec's face burst out from his hood for the first time. The Ron's bluish, hybridized beak clacked, while his beady red eyes bore into the miner, causing him to twitch uncontrollably for a few seconds. The bluish-black, feather-like skin on the Ron shook with rage. He raised the knife and moved towards the miner's neck. "I'll take your blood the old-fashioned way." "Well, at least I got him one last laugh," resigned the miner. "And it's before the sunrise, too." Vec took a step forward, his beak now making a ghastly sucking noise. He lunged the knife upwards. The miner felt the cold metal touch his neck, then saw a glint of light as the blade flickered backwards into the sand. So this is death. As the blade landed in the sand, and the miner was wondering if his life would flash by, Vec was plucked backwards as if hit by an invisible kick. Vec righted himself and looked around wildly. How did you?" Vec wondered aloud. He looked up at the miner's wide eyes and raised eyebrows. The miner looked down and saw a small trickle of blood working its way down his chest. He breathed experimentally. Must have just been a nick. It was his turn to be confused. That wasn't the Ankh. Maybe there is a god. The 6 men behind the Ron drew their weapons, pointing them vaguely at the miner. Vec rotated his head to the right, then, understanding, slowly washed over his avian complexion. "Imur Drongus, demon bastard," bellowed a slow, deep voice. The miner looked over his left shoulder and saw that there was a fourth prisoner. "Oh, you rat," snarled Vec, rising to his feet again. "I see I misjudged you, preacher. Get him." The 6 men moved swiftly towards the man, swords extended. "Thou who giveth life may also taketh," stated Kavin. Kavin's face went still for a moment. One of the blood cloaks froze in his tracks, then, with a gasp, crumpled to the ground. The other 5 looked at him for a second, then hurriedly charged the preacher. One by one, from left to right, the men went down. The last man made it within 3 paces of the prisoner. Vec did not look surprised. Rather, a smile slowly spread across his face as he walked over to a medium-sized wooden chest that had been brought along. He crouched down and opened it. Reaching inside, he pulled out a rectangular wooden box. "Kid," Kevin called out. The miner looked over at him. He had seen him a few times at the tavern. "Yeah?" "No matter what, don't succumb to them. Don't compromise who you are. For once you do, you're already dead." The miner listened and raised his eyebrows. "Well, I think I'm pretty much near the end of my life here, unless you got something else up your sleeve." The miner wondered why Vec would take a clergyman, since everyone knew that they were protected by an order. Although it was a low-tier order, still an order nonetheless. Killing a clergyman would surely attract further attention, or perhaps hunters. As Vec walked past the miner, he opened the wooden box and withdrew a stout, gunmetal black, tri-edged blade. "Do you know what this is, priest?" "How about you, miner?" "Unlikely, since they've been banned on every system. Even possession is a level 1 offense. They don't teach about these in school, nor do they show them off at museums. For this, my friends, is a Krishish wrench." "Well, preacher, you seem to have more power than most, but none have ever penetrated and disrupted my mind like you were able to do. But the real question is, how do you fare when I fight back?" Vec's eyes burned brighter, his pace slowed, and his body relaxed, going into a deep trance. The miner looked over at the preacher. Kavin was a middle-aged man with long, straight white hair. He wore pitch-black robes with white trimmed edges. His eyes were focused and also looked to be entering into a trance. A white circle started to materialize over his chest, stretching from shoulder to shoulder. Inside it, a detailed glyph appeared, beginning to glow brighter. The miner couldn't recognize the exact glyph, but he now knew that the 4th man was no mere preacher. This was a war priest. He couldn't remember the last time he saw a war priest. They were powerful beings, usually out exploring, recording, and recovering valuable artifacts. They were part of the order that protected the clergymen, a well-respected institution similar slightly to the neutral force of the archives. Vec undoubtedly thought this was a simple clergyman when he grabbed him, not a Federation-class warrior. The miner was unsure who had the advantage here. The sun's rays finally reached the post, bathing the miner in a blinding light. The unmoving mental battle continued. The atmosphere was strange. He could hear neither wind nor nature. It was as if all sound had been sucked out. Vec looked to be in an entirely hypnotic state, and while he was still moving, his pace was substantially slower. He wondered what was going on inside their heads. He could never experience one of these mental duels, due to his race's naturally impregnable mind. The miner squinted on at the unseen battle, observing a twitch here or there by both parties. Sweat glistened in the sunlight. It seemed as if he would be cooked to death waiting for this battle to finish. My, how he hated sunlight. In fact, he treated it as its enemy, for his eyes burned under its power. He could feel his artificial lenses hardening as his blinks became more difficult. About 10 minutes into the battle, The twitches became more pronounced. The miner struggled on his post. Man, whoever tied these ropes deserves an award. Then he noticed a change. Vec's right leg suddenly broke through the invisible force field that had held it there, returning to a normal pace, while one of his eyes, the left, suddenly started moving again. Still dragging his left leg in the sand, Vec hobbled to the priest, and with much exertion, raised the Crisius wrench in his trembling right hand. The priest began to shake violently, his eyes rolling up. At the last second, the priest relaxed, bowing his head, and drew a deep breath, his eyes still in another world. Vec summoned his strength and lunged forward. The blade pierced straight through the priest's gut, with such a force that it even went through the wood post, releasing a resounding crack as the post split slightly. White sparks and light bounced off the blade and flowed into Vec, launching him 20 feet skyward. The creature that shakily stood back up was hunched over and physically smaller than before. Walking with the confidence of a centenarian, he hobbled over the dune that had absorbed his impact, his cloak dragging on the ground in many sizes too big for him. He took out something from his pocket and threw it into the sand. A black spot appeared, spreading outwards like ink until a perfect circle had formed. Vec rotated his head backwards and gave a blood-curdling scream. Then he stepped forward, fell into the black pit, and disappeared. The pit shortly followed suit. "What was that?" exclaimed Uli, dropping the rope he was working on. Men poured out of the tents, looking around wildly, blades drawn. "The prisoners. It came from over there," said Boar. The commander scoured the desert for familiar red robes. "Vec, where is he?" The posts were placed away from the camp, and it would take 10 to 15 minutes to get there. "Arm up. Let's move out." In a matter of minutes, over 40 blood cloaks marched up the dune toward the prisoners. Uli wondered what they would find. After spending 3 years on this godforsaken planet, he had become accustomed to living with the sand. In fact, he wasn't sure anything else existed on Khaldun. He had traveled for days in many different directions, but had yet to see any bodies of water. Neither had he seen grass or vegetation of any kind, except for truss pods, which were prickly gray pods with a thick outer shell protecting an edible, green rooty mass. You could puncture them with a sharp knife and suck down a few gulps of water, but if they were not fully ripe, one could suffer from hallucinations. Drinking water, however, could be obtained rather easily for anyone capable of drilling a few feet below ground. The major cities on Khaldun had found a way to cultivate food, but other than that, there was no real sustenance outside the cities. Exilement to the desert meant death. Khaldun had 3 types of desert that Uli had categorized. First was the pure sand desert, where he always seemed to be. Then there was a semi-desert, which was barren but not sandy. And finally, the rock hills. These were massive rocky areas with boulders jutting out in towering conical pillars. He thought they looked like the view a bug would see when crawling along the roof of a cave. Dreg and Dunok, the capitals of the north and the southwest, were built in these rock hills, fully utilizing the conical structures. If this wasn't a forbidden planet, tourists from all over would come to see these natural wonders, and I could get off this fucking hellhole. He had arrived before the net was in place, and was probably one of the planet's last newcomers. Since he was more experienced and educated than most of the local blood cloaks, he had been given the desirable position of Vec's researcher. He spent most of his time in the blood cloaks reading through scrolls and old books, searching for clues and locations of ancient Gunthian artifacts. While he read, he liked to twist rope, a habit of sorts that helped him concentrate. But as it turned out, the time and patience of his careful crafting was rewarded. He made the strongest ropes on this planet. Of that he had no doubt. He had made a trade of them on the side and amassed a small fortune over the years. If only money were of use here. The band of blood cloaks had almost reached the prisoners, just up and over one more dune. Their path took them past the remains of an ancient mammoth beast. "Hey, Uli, you read papers. You know what monster this is?" shouted the native Chaldean, Remy. Uli had read the accounts of the creatures and their feats in the old wars on the planet. "They were called Kudurruns and fought in the great battles," replied Uli. "Kudurrun," practiced Remy, smiling. "Ark with us. One of its ribs is as big as 3 Remy on shoulders." He laughed while admiring the gigantic white skeletal ribs that stretched toward the sky. They were all extinct now. In fact, most animals probably were. Uli had never seen a living animal on the planet except for bramblers, or bevels as they called them in Dreg. They were small, agile creatures with a pointed nose and a long tail. What they survived on, besides a wayward traveler, was a mystery to all. It was also rumored that there were creatures living far underground, but they so rarely surfaced that he didn't count them. Uli glanced at the large scar on his left arm. "Bramblers. I fucking hate bramblers," he muttered to himself. "Don't we all, man?" Overheard a man with wild, dirt-filled blonde hair. "I was out taking a piss one lovely, blistering afternoon, doing a little dune watching. You know, staring at the sands, seeing what the bones would tell me. I was just beginning to see the watchful mug of my wretched Aunt Gilly, when all of a sudden I hear this rustling sound below me. I look down and, lo and behold, I'm pissing all over a brambler den, and the beast within it. It had curled up and burrowed in right there, and with its see-through fur and tan skin, it looked like a small mound of sand. Well, you can guess what happened next. Those razor-sharp, extra-long fangs of theirs have a taste for 2 things, truss pods and blood. That vicious little bastard jumped up and tried to bite off my pisser." "What happened next, Knock?" beckoned Remy. The men nearby were all listening closely to the story, even though many had heard it before. Anything to take their mind off the slow climb up the last steep slope. "I gave that sucker a kick in the guts. Man, you should have seen that thing fly. Thank the gods for reflexes." Knock laughed. "Then there was this time The men finally topped the crest of the final dune, revealing the scene in its entirety. There were 6 dead blood cloaks crumpled on the ground, or at least they looked dead to Uli. 2 prisoners, also dead, hung on their posts. The third was the clergyman's helper, the kid from the tavern at Gunneth, squirming on his post. On the 4th post was a "What the hell?" exclaimed boar. Cabin flailed about uncontrollably, as if possessed. He thrashed about, seizing and arching his back in cringe-inducing angles, only to then slam back into the post at full force. No sound came from his lips, and his eyes looked straight ahead. Every 2 to 3 seconds his body would contort in a new position, slam back, then disfigure itself again. "Is that stammered Flass. "Krishish blade," answered Uli, who had read about the device. Vec had a book on them in his collection. "There is thought to be less than 5 in existence. The Federation has destroyed each and every one that has been found." Uli began to look around anxiously. "This is bad. They've installed detectors throughout the systems. Even on a forbidden planet such as this, they'll be able to tell that one was used." "Yeah, I know about those detectors," replied Flass. "I've heard they only detect vague location of use, as in which planet it's coming from. Don't worry about them honing in on it. It will take them months to get a specialized tracker out here. We will be long gone by then. Hell, they might not even care. We're not in Federated territory. We're in the Varings, Outlands. No one gives a shit about this low-life planet." "What's so special about these blades, then?" asked Boar. "A Krishish wrench is the most powerful torture device in existence," Uli explained. "It feeds off the host's strength and induces a special coma into the mind of the host. Imagine the worst nightmare you've ever experienced, then double it. The Krishish has imbued evil inside that ravages the mind of the inflicted. It also unleashes physical pain, which can be fully felt within the nightmarish coma. It comes in the form of shocks that makes the body feel like it's on fire, or so it has been written. The worst thing about a Krishish is that while it's in use, the hosts cannot die. What? How can you not die? Surely without water you'd be dead in a day, exclaimed Boar. The wrench gives off its own sort of energy that refreshes the body and keeps it alive indefinitely, answered Uli. How do you know about all this? Demanded Boar. Vec has a book in his collection, replied the Sirak. It is a living hell, Nock said, shaking off the shiver. Vec did this? Wondered Flass. Ool, did you know you had one of these? Why did he use it on the preacher, and where the hell is he? Uli shrugged. Should we take it out? Asked Nock. The book I read said that anyone who attempts to remove a Krishish wrench will be killed. It's a high-energy weapon. There is good reason these have been banned with such ferocity throughout Federated systems. Removing the blade will not only kill the preacher, but also yourself. Boar then turned his attention towards the other prisoner. Who the hell is this miner who still breathes? Uli looked closely at the man tied to the post. His black hair was strewn about wildly. The man was trying in vain to avoid the sun's piercing rays. Advancing slowly, Uli came within a step, throwing a shadow over his face. The grimacing stopped, and the miner looked up slowly, unclenching his eyelids with cautious optimism. Is he wearing fake lenses? That's the snoop who stole one of Vec's scrolls. He was always in Gunnet's library, Flass said to Boar. You there. What happened here? Bellowed Boar. Where's the Ron? The prisoner released a snarl. Boar, like a bull ready to charge, expelled 2 massive blasts of air from his nostrils, then trudged forward. Upon reaching the prisoner, he introduced himself the blood cloak way. As the miner recovered from the hit, Boar saw a yellow glimmer. He took a step forward and shifted his eyes back to the men, who were watching the effects of the Krishish wrench, all except for Uli. He stepped a bit to the right to block Uli's view. Then he reached for the chain, which was cool to the touch. He lifted it up and saw that it was holding a heavy gold object, a pure gold cross with a necklace loop on top. What are these markings here in copper? This thing is huge and weighs more than a cannonball. Boar took a quick look at the miner, noting that the cross had left a mark on his chest. At the bottom of the cross thing there were 2 thick bits that jutted out. Reducing his voice to a whisper, is this one of them Heiligen relics that all these hunters come here for? How much is it worth? What does the key open? If you untie me, I'll let you have it, replied the miner, smiling. How does a wretch like you come into possession of such an artifact? Why, I bet you stole it from Vec and were trying to smuggle it out, you thieving bastard, said Boar. He tried to pull the chain off, but it had too few links to fit over the miner's head. Boar looked over the chain for a way to uncouple it, finding that behind the neck was a special solid link, but Boar could see no way to uncouple it. He hid the gold crossing chain back in the man's shirt, turned away abruptly and walked towards his troops. You find the necklace? Flass laughed. Boar gave a defensive look. There's no use. It doesn't come off. We've already tried, stated Flass. The commander reached inside his rucksack and pulled out a long red scimitar. There's more than one way to get it off. A large grin broke out across Boar's face as he looked up at the prisoner in the miner's suit and feasted his eyes upon him. The post holding Kavin split in half with a shower of sparks. Everyone watched as the preacher collided hard with the ground and, still flailing, began to slide down the dune on the remains of the post. Nock, who had gone in for a closer look, froze and barely jumped over the sliding priest in time. Whew, that was a close one, he said. The preacher rolled down the dune, his body grinding into the sand. With a dull thud, the preacher's body collided with the third post before it slung around in front of the prisoner. The miner, through squinting eyes, watched the man writhe in agony. The blood cloaks stood in awe for a few seconds, taking in the situation. Boar laughed, raised his weapon, and began moving towards the captive. While Boar rambled off about what different people in Dreg called his sword, the miner observed the flailing priest before him. but focused rather on the sand that had piled up around his body. The miner stretched his bare feet towards the sand. This time, thanks to the preacher, he was much closer, and when his toes made contact, the sand, like metal filings on a powerful magnet, pulled to the miner's body, enveloping his legs. He looked up at Uli, then gave a slight smile. There was a quick flash of smoke from the miner's eyes. When the air cleared, the Sirak was staring into golden, double-ringed eyes. A deep, loud pulse shot out from the post, causing the sand to sparkle white as a wave propagated across the desert. Uli observed it as it went over the dunes and out of eyesight, then returned his gaze to the bound man. The prisoner looked up. All attention was on him. "You should have killed me when I was helpless. My name is Kabar Erith Thek. I am the curator of the dunes."